The Future of NATO Enlargement, moderated by Dr. Amadeo Watkins, King's College, London.
I see it's a full hall. The panel is interesting. The topic is a current one. So that I hope we'll have a good discussion, and I hope that all of you are preparing some interesting questions. This is your panel. So I'm encouraging you to start thinking positively. We have an interesting panel ahead of us. I would describe it as a policy level senior panel. On the other hand, we mustn't forget that we have an experienced academician with us who will create a balance between among all these policy makers of relatively high level. Before I forget, I wish to thank the organizers for this conference for their invitation. I wish to apologize to them in advance if this panel lasts maybe 5 or 10 minutes longer than planned. It is possible in this case. When I said that the panel is an interesting one, I had two things in mind. The first one is the fact that we have a high level of representatives, which will make my job difficult. And on the other hand, we have complex issues in two ways. On the one hand, we have a strategic question in front of us. We are talking generally about enlargement of the NATO alliance, and on the other hand, we're dealing with local issues of Southeastern Europe, whether a country will be invited to join or not. So the jumping from one strategic holistic level to a more local level can be also challenging. So I'll stop here. In a British manner, I'll start with the discussion, and I would invite the panelists. I first invite Minister Igor Lukšić to take the floor. Good morning, Minister Vesna Pusić. Morning. Welcome. Thank you. Minister Roman Jakič. Minister Miroslav Lajčák. Welcome.
Ambassador Kolinda.
Ambassador Kolinda. Welcome.
Mr. Jonathan Moore.
Mr. Jonathan Moore.
And Dr. Ioannis Armakolas.
And Dr. Ioannis Armakolas.
Welcome. Sad ću malo prebaciti na engleski, mislim da će meni biti malo lakše, čisto da se prevodioci pripreme. And I would like to start this panel with a previous summit and a statement by Hillary Clinton at the time, 2012, and I would like to address this question to you, Mr. Moore. I think you're the most relevant to answer the question. She basically said at the time that that particular summit was the last summit where enlargement was not going to be discussed, and that all future summits would basically be enlargement summits. That was quite a clear policy statement at the time from, I think, the United States. At the same time, I think that created a lot of confusion within Europe, and many analysts have said it has actually blocked planning for this particular summit, which is taking place in the UK. So I would like to hear your views on basically on that particular statement and how it's going to impact the debate probably taking place this September. Please.
Thank you. Well, good morning. I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you for hospitality in Budva. It is a bit more foggy than expected.
But in any case, I am very pleased to be back in Montenegro again. Thank you for the question. Considering the distinguished nature of the rest of the panel, I'm particularly honored to be the first person to receive a question from our moderator. I represent the State Department and the U.S. government, and I'm very pleased to be here. Of course, echo all of the very important comments made by our ambassador, who just addressed all of us here. There is no question that the United States, which hosted 65 years ago the Washington Treaty, which created the alliance, is one of the most committed members, as are all the members of NATO, to the success of the alliance, its continued growth. I'm honored to be here on the panel with ministers from governments as well as an Assistant Secretary General of NATO, countries who joined 5 and 10 and 15 years ago. There is no question that, as we know here, that the doors to the alliance are open and will remain open as countries become eligible, as countries choose to pursue NATO membership. The alliance is going through a process of internal consideration and deliberation. Montenegro is without question the strongest and the most compelling candidate to join the alliance. We have no doubt in the United States that Montenegro will be a member of NATO. The question of timing and circumstances also relates to the question of what is going on with the alliance. As the other members of the panel know extremely well, and in fact better than I, we are facing new threats and problems, as our ambassador, as the head of the Atlantic Council, discussed as well. A year ago, people did not anticipate that actions would happen, such as the occupation of Crimea, other matters that are challenging the alliance. Our president, our vice president have been very active and have been traveling and pursuing opportunities to interact with members of the alliance at the most senior levels. The Article 5 commitment could not be stronger. And yet this is reminding people in the United States, both in our government and in our Congress, that to maintain that Article 5 commitment means spending money on defense budgets. It's unfortunate that there are some members of NATO who are spending rather less than the 2% threshold on defense budgets. This is part of the thinking and part of the concern as we keep Article 5 commitment, which is rock solid, as is our rock solid commitment to enlargement for those countries that want to join and prove that they are eligible. So that is an ongoing process, but the United States is just one of the members. There are going to be discussions at the ministerial level and, of course, at even more senior levels at the summit to determine how the enlargement process unfolds. But let me just say again, we welcome the prospect of Montenegro as a member of the alliance. We are absolutely committed to seeing that be the case, and you are, in Montenegro, the most compelling candidate for membership.
Well, thank you very much. I think Montenegro is going to be happy to hear this particular answer. It's very, some would say, heavyweight support for the summit in the UK this fall. However, in your answer, I think you stipulated several problems. One of them was a budget issue, for example. Another issue might be public opinion and support for NATO membership, including Montenegro and some other states within the region. Ambassador Kitarović Grabar, I know you worked on this particular issue previously in Croatia, and also you're representing NATO today. Is this an issue for NATO, or is it merely something on the sideline?
Well, certainly those are the issues of the day, but I wouldn't say that these dominate or reflect upon enlargement in any way. Let me first say that for me, it's not easy to be on this panel today. I am a NATO official and I represent the view, obviously, of the 28 nations. But also my heart is here with this region. I come from Croatia. I've been on the other side. I know how difficult and frustrating it can be to do whatever you can, to believe that you're doing your best and you're still not getting there. So let me just address briefly 3 main questions that I get these days in connection with enlargement and that I have been hearing actually, as a matter of fact, for the past 3 years. One is NATO experiencing enlargement fatigue for the reasons that you've mentioned and some others as well? Second, is NATO changing accession criteria and setting new standards? And thirdly, is NATO succumbing to Russia's pressure not to enlarge further? A question that I'm sure will come up later on in discussions of the panel. Well, let me set the record straight. First and foremost, on enlargement fatigue, absolutely not. NATO will continue with the policy of enlargement. It will continue with the open door policy. security can never be taken for granted, and I think we've all been reminded of that with the latest crisis. But now to reflect a little bit upon the first question of what Secretary Clinton at the time said about further summits being enlargement summits. I highly respect her and the work that she's done in this region. However, these aspects, these processes cannot be event-driven, nor can we set a deadline for accession unless we are very close to the moment when the country is ready to accede. Because the primary emphasis has to be on criteria, on fulfilling the criteria, on fulfilling the reforms, and then when the country is ready, first and foremost for the benefit of the country itself and its own people, then the moment comes to start setting exact dates on when one can accede to NATO. Are we changing the accession criteria? Again, absolutely not. They are very relevant to a number of reforms that are carried out in Montenegro and in other aspirant countries. Again, I've seen that process in Croatia. It can be painful because the positive results are not always visible. Sometimes the results are really long-term and people cannot understand, and you often think that a lot more is imposed upon you and your own country than on some other countries who acceded prior to the accession. Let me just remind that Secretary Rasmussen has visited the area. He visited Podgorica, Sarajevo, and Skopje only recently, that the foreign ministers will pass the reform conclusions on enlargement policy towards the end of June. And I think we'll know a little bit more about what will happen in Wales this year, but I'm quite confident that we will have a lot more that we've seen so far in terms of the Chicago and Bucharest language. And the third question is NATO succumbing to Russia's pressure not to enlarge further. Again, we will not allow any single other third party to take decisions on our behalf, and we'll also stick to the principle that every country has the right to choose their own future. Russia has always been wary of enlargement. We remember the discussions back in 91, 92 when everybody first started talking about Central Europe acceding to NATO. Russia was adamantly against it. President Clinton in 1994 at the Prague Castle said that it wasn't a matter of if, but when the countries will start acceding. So through a working group that was set up at State Department and with the help also of my colleague today, Sandy Vershbow, they worked on first and foremost making Russia a partner as well in this process and reassuring Russia that enlargement is in no way against Russia or aimed at Russia, but it's about making Europe whole and free, and really we should not just make a motto out of it, and we should give it substance. And secondly, the second outcome of that was that we prepared the ground for accessions that started happening. So we signed the NATO-Russia partnership in 1997 and invited 3 countries to join NATO at the time. The question of Ukraine, somebody mentioned this morning, I hear both sides. First, would this be happening if Ukraine were a member? And there is another argument which says, well, this is precisely happening because of enlargement. And none of these postulates is true, and we can elaborate on that a bit further later on because I don't want to monopolize the fact that you've given me the floor so early. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. My role here basically today is along Chatham House rules to encourage debates. So there is no particular order in the panel, just to make this clear to all of you. In terms of going back to my original question to you, public opinion, because you mentioned reforms, the importance of reforms, etc.
Yes.
So public opinion obviously is an important element of that.
Absolutely. We have the same problem in Croatia.
Yeah, exactly.
I know exactly, and we're really trying to be helpful, and we're working with Montenegrin government, who has done great, excellent job, and with the embassies, our CP here, the Slovenian embassy currently, they've been doing a great job, and the public opinion is going up. But the point is not to get it up for the sake of NATO membership itself, but really for people to understand what it means to be a NATO member, all the privileges, but also all of the obligations of membership.
Minister Lajčák, if I can ask the next question to you, how do you see from your perspective, why does NATO actually need to expand further?
I don't think we should speak about expansion of NATO. It's about the countries who want to become part of NATO. They want to join NATO. It's logical and normal that in this region of the Balkans, as well as in the Central European region, you want to be protected, you don't want to be in a security vacuum, you don't want to become an instrument in geopolitical games. You want to belong somewhere. NATO has proven to be, of course, the guarantor of global stability, and it's logical that my country and countries in my neighborhood chose to join NATO, and we are happy we are members of NATO now, because what's happening in Ukraine now, it's really our immediate neighborhood. It's something we've never expected could happen in the 21st century. Some people even say that we are not yet in the 21st century. This is the end of the 20th century. That started in 1914 and it's closing down. It's definitely not the 21st century we wanted to see. But as worried as we are, there is one thing which is clear: we don't feel threatened ourselves. We feel secure because we are members of NATO. Look at the Russian-Estonian border, which is quiet, and look at the Russian-Ukrainian border, which it's not. So has NATO's enlargement to Estonia made this part of the world more or less stable? I think the answer is clear. So it's not about, and it is being sometimes portrayed as if NATO is trying to expand and to absorb further and further countries and getting closer to someone's border. It's not about that. It's a sovereign choice of each and individual country. They want to belong to NATO. They want to have their security guarantees. They want to be protected. They want to contribute, of course, to the security of all the NATO members. That's how it is. That's how it should be seen and understood. Every accession of every individual country to NATO has contributed to the expansion of the zone of peace and stability and security. That's proven, that's clear. So it has not threatened anyone, but has brought stability. And this is how we should see this process. We should value and assess the countries exclusively on their progress, on the given criteria, which should not be subject of any political or geopolitical considerations, because we will lose our credibility. And the principle on its own merits must be very visible in all this process. So we appreciate the political wisdom of those who made it possible for my country and other countries to join NATO. I hope our generation of politicians will demonstrate the same level of political wisdom and responsibility towards countries like Montenegro and others who want to join NATO, and we will judge them solely on the basis of their performance, of the fulfillment of commitments, and of their overall behavior vis-à-vis their partners in the region.
Okay, well, thank you very much for answering. Quite an interesting answer you've given. I would like to take that answer to Minister Jakič, if I may, to yourself and the view from Slovenia, because the answer from Minister Lajčák basically indicated that we could then look at accession going towards states beyond Southeastern Europe, or, for example, the Caucasus, that we could look at Australia. We could look at New Zealand, we could look at Mexico, which would reinforce the Atlantic sort of hub in the American sort of Canadian sort of side. What is your view on this from Slovenia?
Good morning to everybody. I just wanted to make a few statements and then maybe to elaborate it. Indeed, you know, we can think about going further than it, but we are here to discuss the so-called open door policy and enlargement, and with basically with the pointing out the Montenegro and the three other applicants which are basically under the focus of the enlargement. My first statement is that we cannot talk about the open door policy if the doors are closed. And the doors are closed since the Chicago, where the Hillary Clinton it was mentioned, already said that she hoped that that's the last summit where enlargement is not on the agenda. Secondly, I would like to make a statement that the enlargement is not the technical question. So we can talk about reforms, we can talk about the harmonization of the legislation of the countries which are applying to be the member, but it is a pure political question. So I have sometimes the feeling as a politician, I must apologize myself, that we are using the technical obstacles, technical questions, let's say, to wash our bad conscience, in the sense not to say Montenegro is ready, Montenegro should get the letter of invitation, and then we could even put all the criteria on what they should do in 2 years, but the message to send to Montenegro that they are welcomed should be very clear. I mean, you know, when you're talking about the accession of Montenegro, you have the two questions are always on the table, which is the questions concerning the public opinion, question about the budget, and you know, the technical question, or also very important question. This, as I must say, due to the fact that I'm the defense minister, about the intelligence services. But if I'm abstracting the last one, and I think it can be solved, and the authorities of the Montenegro are fully engaged in this. You know, when you're talking about the budget, look, 28 of us are sitting around the table, and I think 4 or 5 countries are reaching 2% and more of the GDP. All the others, we are squeezed between 1.1% and 1.8% or 1.5%, I would say. And then you have then you are saying to Montenegro, yeah, the public opinion are very low about this. Come on, as a politician, I would never ever raise the expectation of the people that we will get the membership in NATO, and then I would get the negative answer on the summit. Because if you're increasing the expectation of the people that they will accept you, and then they are not doing that, you are basically, the public poll will be after the summit even lower than it is now. So I'm much more pragmatic in this matter. I'm very glad that we did not give up, and I hope that the Montenegro did not give up. With Vesna Pusić, we agreed months ago, or months and a half ago, and yesterday we published the letter signed by both ministers of foreign affairs of Slovenia and Croatia, and the Minister of Defense of Slovenia and Croatia, to our allies, to our partners, that we should put on the agenda of the summit the open door policy, where we should discuss, and I think that we should also issue the letter of the invitation for Montenegro.
Thank you very much. Quite a comprehensive answer, but it raises certain questions in my mind which are not quite clear. I know at the time the ambassador was in the previous Croatian government working very hard on Croatian accession and reaching certain conditions, if that's the right word. Minister Pusić is now very frequently in Brussels working on NATO issues and other foreign policy issues. So it means it's not just a political issue, it's also about reaching certain standards and about certain reforms. And NATO, I think, is quite clear about that. It's not saying, oh, do some reforms on the side, but ultimately we will decide at a political level. It's sending both messages. That's at least my view.
I completely agree. When I didn't want to I didn't want to say that the so-called technical question is not important. It is important, and they are doing that. I mean, they are harmonizing the legislation, and they are not doing that because of when they are, applicant for EU and the NATO. They are not doing that because of EU and NATO. They are doing for themselves. I mean, to reach the standards. But if I'm looking closely, what the Montenegro, for example, concretely done in the past few years, they are moving in the same direction. And I can, Slovenia celebrating this year, that we are celebrating the 10th years of membership in EU and NATO. And I remember I was negotiating the acquis communautaires, and I'm sure the Vesna is much more involved in this due to the fact that Croatia was the last one to enter the EU. I mean, you know, you can do that fast, you can do a little bit slower, you have the problems with the political opinion inside, but they are moving in that direction. So if we are thinking, and we are all saying today, that Montenegro is the most prepared, why they should wait for the weakest links and wait for the package? Why not to say, you know, it's the run, and who is passing the finish line, he or she should be accepted.
Well, let me go back to your policy question again, and because it brings it highlights the importance of Russia, and this is something that I think is strong on everybody's agenda at the moment. Because the way I see it from my angle is that the Russia issue divided Europe in two lots, basically. One was German-UK view, where national interest, the economy, financial sort of aspects were dominant. And the other was the sort of, I would say, the Central Eastern European concern, where they immediately requested NATO assistance and reassurance through I don't know, aircraft being sent, etc., etc. So one might say there is a divide in Europe on this particular issue. And if it is a political issue, primarily a political issue, then the views from Moscow must be taken into consideration, because Moscow is largely sees this as a national security concern and as a threat. The question is quite a complex one. I'll try to ask the ambassador to answer it, but also Minister Pusić, you as well, a view from Croatia. Did you see in Croatia that particular divide in Europe, or did you see it possibly somewhat different? I don't know, Ambassador, just quickly, if you want to answer the point.
Yes, just quickly. Of course, NATO is an alliance of 28 sovereign nations who keeps sovereignty in all aspects. So we arrive to decisions based on consensus. If we don't agree on something, we just keep talking, and I think it's a great principle. What we want to avoid, and talking about enlargement and particular names of the countries, is for enlargement an open door to become a divisive issue. And the door does not open automatically just because there's someone standing behind it. I will again underline the principle of individual approach, of individual accession, which is the best and the fairest. It allows NATO to preserve the credibility of imposing the same criteria. And it gives the countries a chance to proceed at their own speed, and they don't have to wait for anyone else and be part of the same package. Now, on Russia, throughout all these years, we worked with Russia in the NATO-Russia Council. And what I've seen in the past years, yes, we did disagree on several issues, but there was always a lot of positive cooperation in combating terrorism, counter-narcotics, counter-piracy, and many other projects. And this is what NATO would like to continue to do. We would want to continue to engage Russia. But the fact of the matter is that Russia has broken a number of fundamental principles of international law, beginning with respect for state sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and the right of countries to choose their own future. So it cannot be business as usual, but we have to continue the political dialogue.
So
because
just a quick intervention.
Only through dialogue can we resolve these current issues. However, enlargement is non-negotiable. It's not on the table. It's a NATO policy, and it's the decision of any particular state or country to decide whether they want to become member of a political alliance or not.
Okay, no, that answers that question. Minister Pusić, what is the view from Croatia?
Dobro jutro, vidim da su svi ovdje krenuli govoriti engleski, pa ću onda i ja, ali barem da na naškom vas pozdravim ovdje.
Ja nisam usudio to.
Ti bi na slovenskom. Dakle, hvala na pitanju. Osim toga i moram reći komplimenti na vašem hrvatskom ili crnogorskom, whatever.
Bosanskom. Ja
Bosanskom, dobro. Ukraine obviously does matter and did matter, and the situation in Ukraine did divide to some extent the member states of both the NATO alliance and certainly European Union in terms of how to best approach this issue. And I know that all these organizations always want to show a sort of consensual face, but since these are real people in real countries, this is impossible. And it isn't true that all the countries always agree on all the things. The good thing about these alliances is that you actually can genuinely discuss things. And I will never forget when things started happening in Ukraine. We had one of those NATO ministerial dinners, and one of my colleagues from Central Eastern Europe, after a number of people were analyzing what was happening and how things were developing and what will happen and who is right and who is wrong and what should we do and how should we react, he said, well, I don't know about all this analysis and I don't want to go into that right now. The only thing I really do know is that I'm extremely happy today that I'm in here rather than out there. And I think this is the bottom line. And this is why, over the years, the alliance has, with all its problems, has developed a sufficiently attractive reputation. It's developed a reputation where countries see this as an alliance that actually works. And I know that these things are and should be discussed in terms of principles and all of those things, but we are also faced with real life situation here. There is no doubt that criteria have to be met. I don't think anybody has ever disputed that, because the whole process doesn't make sense if you don't go through this transformation that meeting the criteria means. But actually also over the years, certainly since the Chicago summit, everybody has agreed that Montenegro has more or less met all the criteria. It moved, so the question here is not whether we agree that Montenegro should get an invitation, right or wrong, meeting or not meeting the criteria. What we are discussing is, has Montenegro actually met those criteria? And as Roman Jakič, my friend and colleague and longtime friend actually, from many different positions that we had in our political careers, said we in Slovenia and Croatia think they, as two member states, think that they actually have met the criteria. And this is the point of our letter that we have written in sort of anticipation of the decision that will be made. The question, our argument is not, times are tough, which they are. Ukraine has changed geopolitics, which it has. Ukraine has changed psychology. I was actually fascinated how, when this was happening, we were all trying to figure out how to react. Because in our political lifetime, the relations between the West and Russia have constantly been improving. There were always, even when they were not too good, they were always a little better this year than they were last year, and then they were constantly getting better, and everybody was used to that. And now, all of a sudden, within 2 weeks, it went into a politically unknown territory for us. It was something that we knew about historically, but this is a very new situation. So I think we have to take this into account. But when we talk about Montenegro, we are not saying all this has changed, which, as I said, it had. So because of that, Montenegro should be cut some slack. Montenegro should be somehow pushed in into the alliance because things have changed so much and it's small geopolitically at on a very important location. All of these things are true. But the point of our letter, again, is not that. The point of our letter is not Ukraine, although you're very right. It has influenced all of our minds in terms of thinking about politics in general. Our point is that we think that Montenegro is actually ready and that everything it needs to do, it can do in between getting the invitation and joining. And this is the position that we stand on. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that I think fairly comprehensive answer. Before I move to the more, what I described at the beginning, the local issue, and I'm quite keen to give the floor to Minister Lukšić, I would like to go to our experts here and to the academic world and basically ask the question, are reforms actually taking place in the region? Several states that we're discussing here today have been in PFP or MAP for years now. Some would say that that's normal, that it took Croatia, Slovenia 3, 4, I don't know how many years, I can't remember, that's a normal process. Some will say that it's actually very slow and that we're at a stalemate and nothing's happening. What is the view from the academic world?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And it's a great pleasure to be in Montenegro and an honor to be in this panel.
Can you bring the mic closer?
The mic closer.
No? Is it okay now?
Yep. I think it's better.
Can I also address very briefly the public opinion issue?
2 sentences, please.
Okay, I will leave it for later if there is time, because I think it's quite an important point to be made on the flip side of this discussion. Regarding reforms, I think there have been reforms, and I think I share the opinion of, I think it was Minister Lajčák or Mr. Jakič, who mentioned the fact that because it's a political decision at the end of the day to offer membership, very often we will tend to qualify the reforms depending on the order of the day, the political order of the day. So sometimes the reforms are colored in a very positive spin, sometimes the reforms are judged not to be just about right for the membership. So I think overall, in terms of reforms, the region has done pretty well. I have no doubt in my mind that Montenegro is ready, and I wouldn't worry for a minute about public opinion and popularity of NATO membership, but you don't let me talk about that, right? And I think we have to take into account that these are countries that are post-conflict countries. Most of the countries in the Western Balkan remaining countries to join NATO. They're not the same type of candidate countries that you would have in Central Europe. These are countries that are still in a transition phase when it comes to the post-conflict stabilization and consolidation of their democracies. So membership is not only about achieving the reforms, but it's also about them feeling more secure and being part of the wider community that will allow them to develop the internal consensus to push forward even further the reforms. So for me, reforms for membership of NATO and in fact for membership to the EU is not only about achieving things, but about giving them an extra push to further this goal also in the future. So I think we may be able to discuss in more detail about individual cases. I understand this will happen later.
Yes, indeed. I think we're going to move to a very particular individual question. I would like to address Minister Lukšić yourself and the case of Montenegro. I'm sorry it's taken a while to get to yourself, but I've got a very interesting question for you. I mislim da bi u stvari, izvinjavam se prevodiocima, možda prešao direktno na ovaj domaći jezik.
I will skip now to our language. The question of budget was asked, and the question of allocation in between 1 to 2%. I believe that Montenegro is somewhere there in between. Do you think that the budgetary issue is one of the key issues? Because if there is no money, you can do some things. I know that you've been in finance, so probably the most competent person in Montenegro to answer this question. Thank you very much for your question and for reminding me of the time when Montenegro was regaining its sovereignty, and when what we found was a situation where we had to transform seriously our military forces. Under the circumstances then, we didn't have the MOD of Montenegro, we had the joint one, and the Ministry of Finance was doing most of the activities with reference to financing management military system, because the budget, allocated budget, was less than the military requirements were, when at that time we had over 7,000 military personnel in Montenegro, and we had majority of other problems that we were facing, and therefore I could probably speak in more details right now, which I would propose not to do, about this procedure of transforming our military forces in order to reach the level at which we are right now. And I would like to express my pleasure with those remarks where we have been told that we have reached good interoperability standards, which has been confirmed in several ways. First of all, by Montenegro's participation in ISAF mission, which by all standards has been adequate to what our resources and our capabilities were. And I'm extremely pleased to have had this opportunity to meet those even more challenging rounds in the joint contingent forces with Croatia to undertake those activities. And the additional circumstances were that Montenegrin military officers and soldiers were in a position to participate in other EU missions as well, whereby we had reached an unanimous decision in the parliament, which show the fact that we have passed a long path. And the dilemma that always stands is whether we have enough allocation for those purposes, and definitely in the forthcoming period it is necessary to improve those issues. However, it seems that this topic is something that should be seen from one realistic point of view, and I believe that Mr. Jakič has given his contribution to discussion, whereby this is a challenge ahead of Montenegro, and this is a challenge ahead of many other countries that are already NATO members. However, what makes Montenegro candidate is definitely our determination, full determination, and a serious attitude towards all the obligations that we have ahead of us, not only with reference to the allocation for the military forces, but let's start numbering from the beginning. Under the circumstances, we fully share the values that core values of the Euro-Atlantic institutions, NATO, and we are fully dedicated to establishing the institutions of the rule of law, and this has been shown by our Euro-Atlantic path, where we have numerous monitoring mechanisms. The progress is evident. We haven't completed it, but the progress is evident. We haven't completed the process yet, but the progress is evident. We have reached those interoperability standards, and what should be added, and what is evident, are the challenges that we have been bearing on our shoulders when it comes to the reform of the security system and intelligence services, where we may say that we have done a lot, we have made significant steps forward, and our security forces are on the right way to meet all the necessary standards under the circumstances of the fully fledged alliance, membership in the alliance. Apart from this, we have those public support issues that we have been working very intensively on in the past couple of months, which has shown a very tangible result, and that is measuring the support by public polling, which is now 46%, raised from 13 something, and this doesn't mean that this percentage is not a volatile one. Definitely everything that has been going on around us, such as Ukrainian crisis and similar, open various issues that additionally emphasize our dedication to share the values of the Atlantic Alliance and to make all of this evidence. I have to draw upon your answer. You have said values and sharing values. Does that mean that the decision of Montenegro to introduce sanctions towards Russia, which reference to the situation in Ukraine, was that sharing the same values with NATO? I would say that for Montenegro it was a very difficult decision to make. I wouldn't remind you of all the historical aspects right now and all the issues related to them, but having in mind the fact that in so far we have been creating 100% harmonization of the realization of our foreign policy goals with the EU foreign policy, it shows our full dedication. We are not the country that adds or subtracts something. We like this, we don't like this, so let's take this, let's throw this away. But we are aware of our strategic goals, which were even before regaining the sovereignty membership of NATO in the EU. And now, 8 years later, we are in a position to reconfirm this. It doesn't mean that this decision on imposing sanctions was not a controversial one. It doesn't mean that it will make some consequences, potential consequences for ourselves. It means that we will be discussing with people who are reconsidering the issue in terms whether it was necessary or not, but the question is that people do understand that in such situations you cannot hold two chairs at the same time. You cannot sit on two chairs at the same time. You have to decide for one. Basically, you have to determine your strategic and your state path.
Thank you for the response. The interesting question is what benefits come out from the membership to NATO. Mr. Kosic, if I may ask you, what are the benefits from regarding Croatia? It's been 5 years, if I'm not wrong. What are the benefits from NATO membership in Croatia? First of all, reorganization and restructuring of the armed forces in the country, setting up high standards within the armed forces, within the army. We may be a dramatic example in that sense because we are a country that was at war, and that, let's say, difference between the armed forces of the Republic of Croatia in the year 2000 and the armed forces of the Republic of Croatia now is immeasurable. The armed forces, the army, is an institution which is smaller in numbers, but it is perceived as a factor of stability and enjoys a high trust in Croatia. It concentrates on strengthening its capabilities in terms of sophistication of training, technology, and if I can put it in a blunt Balkan terms, nobody sees it as a danger for the authorities in the country, which could not be said in the year 2000. So transformation of the army into a serious normal institution that contributes to the stability of the country in Croatia is absolutely visible and dramatic. We need to stress the advantages of cooperation with the NATO members, joint missions, participation in NATO missions. ISAF for us was an important and remains an important mission. I just want to add something else to what Minister Lukšić mentioned. In this region, we are often seen by NATO opponents, or are we criticized by NATO opponents by saying that we listen to everything that the West tells us to do. And they see NATO from that point of view. So what we are trying is to raise awareness, which is more a result of geopolitics rather than geography. We raise awareness that here, where we are, in Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, we are geographically, historically, or in terms of identity, West. In the political, historical sense, we are the West. And that is the idea that we are slowly approaching as societies. And that is why we sometimes have conflicts or discussions of this kind that you mentioned. If I may just say, I see that the foreign policy of Croatia is very active in terms of regional cooperation, assisting other states such as Montenegro and some others in terms of their possible membership to NATO alliance. Can you just say something more about this policy? It is not false modesty to say that it is our selfish interest. We think that our interest is that the countries of the region reach the criteria through transformation and reforms to reach criteria so that they can function as stable countries that meet the requirement of NATO membership. And that's why we're working on that. I think it's safer for us too. And it is absurd sometimes when we are accused of trying to reduce the criteria. That is contrary to our interests. We don't want to reduce the criteria. We want to help the countries to meet these criteria because it means better security for all the countries in the region, including Croatia. Thank you all for your response. It is a big panel.
Could I just demystify the defense budget? Yeah. Because I don't think it's fair just to put pressure on Montenegro here. And I'm grateful that the Deputy Prime Minister outlined the criteria that are ahead of Montenegro to continue to fulfill once they accede to NATO and well beyond that as well. So the issue of declining defense budget is an overall problem for the alliance as well. And I think that the last Ukraine crisis has really been a true wake-up call to everyone, that we cannot take security for granted and that we cannot rely too much on North America or more specifically the United States. So we obviously have a capabilities gap between the two sides of the Atlantic, but also among the European states as well. And when we talk about the issue of, or the recommended 2% of the GDP for defense, it's true that only a few countries satisfy that criteria. Croatia, I believe, we had it projected that we would reach the 2% of GDP sometime around accession. However, at the time that we acceded, we weren't exactly there. But another problem that all of our countries here are facing is not just the amount of money that goes into the budget, but the structure of that budget. A lot of that money goes into military pensions rather than into investment in technological capabilities. So when we talk about advantages of NATO membership is combine those resources together in smart defense, in connected forces initiatives, in framework nations concepts, etc., which allows you to save money by investing it smartly. But also, it's a fact of the matter that we need to see that trend of stopping the declining budgets, and I think that most of the countries, if not officially, then unofficially, are committing to that this year, and then to see more investment into defense budget, because security, really, you can't put value on human lives as security.
Okay, well, thank you for the intervention. I would like to bring in the audience now. I think it's we have a few minutes left in the panel. I have a question over there, and then immediately after that, I actually, if we can do one question at a time, it might be better. If I can ask you to keep your questions short and to the point, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Amadeo. Julian Lindley, French. I've heard a lot of grand strategic picture of our alliance is about to expand rapidly as the obligations on the United States globally expand. I fully support the membership of all European countries of our alliance, but do you fully grasp the obligations, the costs and the requirements that a 21st century NATO will indeed impose upon you?
Do you have anyone in mind in terms of answering the question?
I will leave that to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, thank you. If I can ask the ambassador from NATO to answer that question, and then possibly Minister Lajčák. Thank you.
First, well, value is absolutely important, and Julian and I have discussed that so many ways. NATO is not just the military and a political alliance, but an alliance of values, and they're enshrined in our founding treaty, as a matter of fact. And they are becoming more important. Our polling data shows that the young people increasingly put emphasis on values rather than security for military threat. They will say the protection of values is important. And that's why I was so happy to hear lately in Montenegro. I know how difficult it has been for you, for a society that was divided because of the events of the past. How much courage it took for you to choose that path and to explain that to your own population. But to have the citizens on board is immensely important for precisely taking obligations that come out of membership. I was happy to see your troops just a week ago at Camp Marmal in Mazar-i Sharif, and they're doing a great job. And that is one of the obligations that is voluntarily undertaken, but that gives added value to the whole operation in terms of political support and in terms of particular knowledge that the Montenegrin troops or Bosnian and others can contribute to that mission. Obligations are also to, when we talk about defense budget, not to be a free rider, not to rely on somebody else. Yes, you are part of that security umbrella, but you want to be a responsible member and see how you can invest smart in your own defense, where you can find your niche that is necessary for your national defense, but also where you can work with others to build international capabilities so that the alliance remains the security alliance for the 21st century, and we don't allow third nations or third parties to fill in the gaps that unfortunately have come to be and that we have identified, and that's why Wales will be particularly important.
If I may, my answer to your questions about obligations and understanding would be sure we do, and now we do even more. And we understand it even better because Ukraine was a wake-up call. We did become too complacent. We really believe that our area is safe, protected. Now we know it's not. We have been doing a lot already. We have each of the countries represented here are part of the NATO-led operations outside of NATO area. We are doing things regionally. Countries like Slovenia, Croatia, Slovakia are transferring our know-how, our positive, authentic, first-hand experience to countries like Montenegro, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and the others. What needs to be done now, and it's clear, is of course to put our things back home in order. And I'm speaking about defense budget. It's not easy. It's not easy from the perspective of governments, prime ministers. We seem to be climbing out of the worst of the crisis. For those of us who are members of Eurozone, it's permanent pressure to consolidate your budget deficit, to go up to the zero level. But it's clear, we have to do it. We have to make sure that the eastern wing of NATO is ready and secure and well protected. And this will be one important part of our discussions we are going to have in Wales in September. And I'm certain that all the allies will present a credible plan how to get there. So now the feeling of responsibility to protect our people and to act in our neighborhood and to be the beacon of peace and stability has become more evident than 6 months ago. So I'm very positive on this.
Can I just continue on the budgets issue? And the ambassador previously quite correctly said it's not just about putting more money into defense, it's actually ensuring that that money is spent well. And I can observe, I've been in this job for a very long time, that most countries are not spending that money well, which actually means not addressing the Ministry of Defense issue. It's actually a government problem where you have to tackle also reforms of the pension system, reforms of many other issues within government. So how do you see, is that actually realistic at this time when most countries are still in recession? Is that a realistic thing to do?
Sure, and the funny thing is that there is always something good in all the bad situations. The bad situation is the crisis, less money for defense spending, but it forces us to be more creative. And this is where the pooling and sharing comes from, or the smart defense. In our case, Slovakia is part of the regional cooperation known as Visegrad 4. We have expanded our cooperation into the defense area because we were forced to. So we are putting together the joint battle group, which will be operational as of 2016. We have a strategic agreement with the Czech Republic about the joint patrolling of our airspace. We are putting together facilities for the training of our armed forces. So these are things we do to save money, to cut the costs, but at the same time to keep the level of operational ability at necessary level. So you have to be creative here, and I think this also increases the level of confidence between and among the members of the alliance, because we really share, or we let each other into the areas which were considered to be exclusively, nationally protected.
Thank you very much. I have a question just over here. Please, sir.
Morning, everyone. Vytautas Butrimas, Ministry of Defense, Lithuania. Just a quick comment and a question. Wake-up call, Russia. Read Putin's August 16th, 1999 speech to the Duma. Shouldn't have been a wake-up call, believe me. But question, Lithuania next year is planning to join the Eurozone. There's very strict Maastricht criteria for Eurozone qualification. And it's a very interesting criteria because there's a before criteria and there's a kind of almost an enforcement criteria after you join the zone. If you start falling out of the categories, the norms, you start getting some sanctions. What about NATO? Is 2% enough? Is it enough to talk? I should be the one to talk. Lithuania is in last place now as far as contribution to NATO, but after Ukraine, things are going to be being pushed up in the budget. But to really meet the security challenge, to just say, okay, I'm going to join, I'll give 2%, and afterwards, okay, forget about it, we'll relax. Is that really going to meet the security requirements for defense? Shouldn't we in NATO consider a Maastricht-type criteria for financing for the contribution to defense? And that includes capabilities. Without U.S. help, Libya would not have been possible, Afghanistan would not have been possible. U.S. is going to get tired from carrying all this load, and I think it's a wake-up call for Europe, for the European membership of NATO to do their fair share. So the question is, what about a Maastricht-type, in quotation, criteria for finance, and with some teeth in it, like joining the Eurozone? Thank you.
And who's the question for?
There were several panelists who talked about finance, so I don't remember all the names, but maybe the ones who talked about financial obligations.
Igor,
Thank you.
Used to be.
Okay, well, if I can address the question to, again, the ambassador, please, because after all, you are representing NATO here, and it is a question for NATO to consider, first of all, and then possibly, let's see.
Yeah, well, first of all, there are no sanctions toward member nations. Again, NATO is an alliance of absolutely sovereign states, and sovereignty is respected. But also, again, an alliance of values, and one of the basic principles is solidarity. So obviously that is what dominates our discussions. 2% of the GDP and a certain portion of that for the right type of investment is a recommendation. So there is always room for nations to agree, should that not be enough, to proceed further at other numbers, hypothetically speaking. However, everybody is also mindful of the times of austerity and the difficult economic situations in all of our countries. So when we talk about capabilities, now I think that is the crucial aspects that we focus, and we've been working a lot on that in the past months. in determining what the capability gaps were. It's true that OUP would not have happened without the U.S. reconnaissance capabilities, that in Afghanistan some of the crucial enablers are provided by the U.S., and that in some areas the U.S. provides 100% of capabilities, and I think that's completely unacceptable. So Europe does have to step up to the plate. I believe everybody is aware of that. Secretary General Rasmussen has been very outspoken on those issues, especially in the last few months. And then again, we're working towards the Wales Summit to determine those crucial, critical capability gaps for NATO, for framework nations, for groups of nations, for regional projects. To acquire those capabilities, then that would be, of course, based on certain rules, available for the whole of the alliance for our defense. But we seriously have to look at the world around us. We have to look at the increases that Russia, increases of their percentage of GDP in defense. China. In Europe, we tend to forget China altogether. So we need to look at the space around us globally, not just the Euro-Atlantic space, but globally, and see what the game changers are and how the power is shifting, and make sure that, again, NATO remains the strongest alliance. And that will be done only through smart and coordinated investment into the capabilities that we really need, and stop spending money on capabilities that we just keep, that are on autopilot, that are just an issue of national pride or military tradition. We need that wake-up call to really look at what the situation looks today and look into the future of what the potential threats could be. And let's not forget emerging security challenges, and in this whole Russia-Ukraine crisis, let's not forget about terrorism and the threat of global and local terrorist organizations as well.
Minister Lajčák, would you like to just briefly?
Yes, we had a very open and frank discussion about these issues at our last ministerial meeting in April, and I can tell you that everybody understands that it's no longer sustainable to rely almost exclusively on the United States when it comes to the budgeting of NATO, and also the fact that out of all the European allies, it's only 3 who provide basically 60% of the European contribution to the budget. We know that, and we are going to do something about it. We have to be realistic. Most of us are members of the European Union as well, and as you mentioned, we are members of Eurozone, and we have very strict Maastricht criteria demanding that we reach a balanced budget in 3 years from now. We were at minus 4.5 2 years ago. We were below 3% last year. So that means there is this pressure to reduce the expenditures and to get to the balance. At the same time, we speak about possibility of economic sanctions against Russia, which would also have negative impact on our budgets, our GDPs. But we are ready to do so if the situation so requires. So let's be realistic. Speaking about NATO, it's still the same. It's still the one budget, no matter how many organizations you belong to. It's rather to be modest in our commitments, but to deliver on them, like the 2%, instead of really, making big, huge plans which we will be unable to respect. So I think I know, on the basis of the discussion that I've been taken part of, there is clear understanding of the seriousness of the situation within NATO, and I said we are all in the process of doing our own homework and being able to present the results of that homework in June, and then definitely in September at NATO Summit.
Minister Jakič?
Yes, I agree what was definitely said, but in this financial situation, it is a little bit utopic to think that we can increase the budget for the...
Have to.
I mean, at least in Slovenia, but I'm sure for all the others. It's almost impossible. Secondly, what concerns me is not the percentage we are giving to the defense, but the cuts inside that percent. For example, in Slovenia, I will tell you how difficult the situation is, that we are basically spending 80% on salaries, 17% on the maintenance, and just 3% on modernization, which is bad. I mean, it's really bad. Normal contribution would be 50% for salaries, 30% for maintenance, and 20% for the modernization. And thirdly, due to those two facts, so we cannot increase the budget, and we have the problem inside. We are doing best inside the NATO to find the solutions, or to find the synergies between the member states. And if a few years ago the smart defense and pooling and sharing was just the letter on the paper where we were thinking that that would be, and then also the framework of nation was in the air. Now we are basically doing this. We are trying to find the synergies because we are not able to, let's say, to invest in modernization.
Minister Pusić.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to react to this notion that somehow countries, members of NATO should be sanctioned or would be sanctioned if they don't meet the 2% budget target. What would be the sanctions? You'd throw them out?
No.
It is a security alliance. It is extremely important. I cannot think of one country in the NATO alliance that I would want to throw out, or that I would want to bar from participating in joint operations. And if you expect a country to participate in joint operations, you also cannot bar that country from the decision making. And with all due respect, there is a hierarchy. There is obviously a hierarchy in importance and influence in the decision making. But I think that, while we, since we voluntarily said 2% and this is our target, while we are keeping our eye on it and trying to get there, at the same time, we certainly don't want to lose members. We don't want to bar any members from participating in operations. And we have countries, and Eastern Europe and Central Europe is a case in point. We have countries where we are transforming our military and our armies from a huge thing in the past to much more operational, technically better equipped small armies. And this creates the problem that Roman was talking about. You have pensions. This is not going to last forever, but for the next decade, this is something that we will be faced with in this process of transition. And this is part of the reason why we are not using the defense budgets, even the ones that we have, in the most effective way. At the same time, we are all participating, and a number of us are participating in some NATO operations beyond and above anything we ever thought we would actually do in terms of people and intensity of presence. And ISAF is definitely a case in point.
Thank you very much. I think we have several people in line. Ako mikrofon može gospodinu skroz dole desno, molim vas, prvi je na redu, koji je digao ruku. Charles, can you just put your... Ko ima mikrofon? Molim vas, dajte gospodinu mikrofon. This gentleman was second in line. I have to follow an order. I apologize to anyone who's... And then, sir, you're next. And then we have a gentleman over here on the right. Please.
Thank you, Amadeo. Keir Giles from Conflict Studies Research Centre in the UK. Thank you to all of the panelists for some fascinating answers. Just like Vytautas Butrimas, the previous questioner, I was struck by the repeated suggestions that Russian actions in Ukraine present a fundamentally new and unexpected situation. I'm fairly confident our Georgian and Baltic colleagues would agree that the wake-up call for NATO should have come some time ago. But what is new is the way in which Russia has refined its methods for taking assertive action in neighboring countries in defense of what it defines as its own security interests. So my question for any of the panelists who would wish to pick it up is, what should NATO be doing differently or better to assure the security both of its existing members and those that wish to accede in future against security threats other than old-fashioned 20th century military ones? In other words, other than armed attack as defined in Article 5. Thank you.
And the question goes to anyone?
To any of the panelists who has a view.
Ladies, gentlemen in the panel, anyone wants to address the question?
Well, I'm not sure I heard the question in its entirety, but what NATO should be doing to reassure members
Differently.
defend. Obviously, Article 5 applies to NATO member nations only, and that is non-negotiable. So any attack on the territory, resources, people of any NATO member country is an attack on all. Right now, in this current crisis between Russia and Ukraine, and yes, there have been a lot of wake-up calls, especially when it comes to investing into defense. However, I think this one was heard loudest now with the actual threat coming so close to the borders of NATO, to the eastern borders. So what we wanted to provide and what we're providing is first and foremost visible reassurance, particularly to the countries who are bordering or are in the neighborhood of Ukraine. And secondly, that credible deterrence, which is absolutely necessary and that goes in line with the political conversation, with the political dialogue with Russia, which obviously needs to be a political solution. But we also have to send a message that we stand ready and that we will defend any of our members who may come under attack.
If I may, I would insist on the fact that Ukraine was a wake-up call. Of course, there were signals, but a speech of the president is one thing, and the change of borders of other country in a clear violation of international law and that country constitution is a different thing. So we did find ourselves in a new situation, and some red lines which were invisible, but we were sure they were there, were clearly crossed. So this is a new situation to which we have to react, and I would only complement what Ambassador Grabar-Kitarović said. We need to redefine our relationship with Russia, because obviously NATO-Russia Council, as it was projected, does not represent the state of relationship we are having right now, and we shall not pretend that we are 29 friends who are sitting together and discussing about third countries, about common threats. We need to address the fact that we found ourselves in a different game, and while saying this, I'm not trying to be anti-Russian. I'm trying to be open, and I'm trying to say this is the new situation. And second, we need to be clear, transparent, predictable with our own NATO policies, including open door policy, including enlargement. It would be a big mistake if enlargement is seen as a part of the, either pleasing Russia or confronting Russia. It has nothing to do with Russia or with any other country. It's about us, it's about NATO, it's about the countries who want to join NATO. And we must avoid any temptation of putting the and open door policy into the context of NATO-Russia current difficult relationship.
Thank you very much. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Volodymyr Grusko. I am former foreign minister of Ukraine. Dear colleagues, I do believe that we are making great mistake talking about the crisis in Ukraine, because there is no crisis in Ukraine. There is an aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. It should be very clear for everyone. Otherwise, we will have very difficult positions to say real and honest words. So it is my first remark. And probably we should put the question not about the crisis in Ukraine, but about the consequences of this Russian aggression against Ukraine, and secondly, about consequences for the entire North Atlantic security area. So my question to you, dear panelists, is, it is not the high time to think about the new security system for this area, taking into account that if we are talking about Russia, we should clearly understand that we are living in two different civilizations. And I fully agree, someone of you who said that the extension of NATO is not pure technical or even political issue. It is a question about the choice of civilizational choice. It is choice for how to see our common future, democratic or totalitarian, free or aggressive. That is why, once again, I thank you very much for your interventions and for your thoughts, but please, it is my personal view, we should clearly say about the facts. Otherwise, we have no chance to clearly give answers to the questions we are talking about. And once again, what about your views about the necessity of the new security system for the, at least for the North Atlantic area? Thank you so much.
If I can respond just to the first part of your comments, sir, you're absolutely right. I mean, this clearly is an aggression, and we have said so in so many words. But we're talking about crisis in Ukraine because, sir, the Crimea is Ukraine. Donetsk is Ukraine. So obviously, we were not acknowledging the fact that another country has undermined the rules of the international law and annexed parts of another country through a shotgun referendum that lasted the whole process for about 9 days, and that has violated the very memorandum that they signed back in 1994 in Budapest, whereby they committed to protect the territorial integrity of Ukraine and its internationally recognized borders, its political independence, and its sovereignty. So what's here at stake is not just a regional crisis, it's not just a military security crisis. This is also setting very dangerous precedents and undermining the whole rule book of the international law in all of the aspects that I have mentioned already, and I'm not going to go into the details again to bore you. Do we need a new security system? Well, we've got the Council of Europe. We've got the Organization for Security and Stability in Europe as well, the OSCE. In my mind, that would be the organization who should be involved in this political dialogue and resolving this crisis. We've got the UN and, of course, NATO, which is not the first responder, but certainly is concerned with upholding the rules of international law and working with the international community to resolve this crisis and, again, to bring about order in Europe. But, yes, this is very dangerous, and it can be reflected not just in parts such as Transnistria or Moldova, South Ossetia, Abkhazia. We can go even further around this globe where these dangerous precedents could be taken as an example. If we're not firm in standing for the principles of international law, they can be taken as an example to break the rule book of international law again.
Well, thank you for that intervention. Minister Pusić.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really feel, and in Croatia there is really a strong sense of somehow sympathy and solidarity with Ukraine and what's happening there. And I think you know that. And there is certainly the element of annexing Crimea, of stirring up unrest in the eastern Ukraine and Donbass. There are many things there that remind us of us, and in, let's say, much smaller proportions 25 years ago or some time ago. We even recognized some of the rhetoric and everything from those years. But one thing I would really, with all the sympathy, would like to tell you, don't fool yourself. There is a crisis in Ukraine. Because on top of all of this, I know that because we also tried to tell ourselves in those years, no, we are fine, it's just this problem. But we were not fine. There is a problem of the capacity of the institutions. There is the problem of actually being able to control the territory, even the one that wasn't annexed of your country. And the sooner we face this, the sooner you will start taking care of that in an effective way. Because it's impossible to be under such pressure that you are under and not to have a crisis at home. And not to have the problem of dysfunctional institutions, of penetrated institutions, of miscommunication and non-communication between different institutions and parts of the country. And the sooner you take this by the horns, so to speak, and start dealing with that, the better it will be. And I think that in itself is also a process for gradually qualifying for the different integrations that you're looking at. As far as changing the security system, I think that the North Atlantic Alliance in that sense is extremely important for Europe. European Union is doing something on its own also, but in terms of sort of focus on security in the military sense, I think the NATO, the question is to help member states, help others qualify for membership and find a way in which this becomes doable. Because by simply sort of pushing against each other, countries like ours that are on the border, that are border countries between the two big spheres of interest, always in the end pay the price. And there we have to think of a realistic solution, of something that's real, that's not just sort of set words and sentences and phrases. There has to be real understanding where we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sir?
Thank you very much. I'm Dan Miletić, I'm professor from Belgrade. I'm very happy to be here. First of all, I want to congratulate to Montenegro and for Minister Lukšić, because Montenegro took very brave step ahead and started the very important thing for the regional peace, first of all, and stability. And I'm hoping that those words from ministers from our region, Ms. Pusić and Minister Jakič, are the words of encouragement and the words which are going to be most valued in NATO, and that they will understand the efforts of Montenegro and helping to be healed those wounds in the region. Why I'm talking like that? Because right now we have a great crisis or unexpected aggression, as our colleague from Ukraine was telling us about, and we have something which we didn't expect it. But what about the second weakest point of Europe today and second weakest point of Euro-Atlantic community, if you want to talk about like that? I'm thinking about the Balkan region and the question of Serbia. How we are going to heal that wounds? I would like to hear Mr. Moore, how he sees from the perspective of US the position of Balkan and especially Serbia, and how we can heal those wounds, because it is very important for our common future. I was initiated to talk like this and to raise those questions because I have heard from Ms. Pusić, Minister Pusić from Croatia, that she mentioned Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro as a part of Euro-Atlantic community, but not Serbia. And I felt somehow offended because we are all part of Euro-Atlantic community. That is something which is going to be proven in a coming period. But we need time, we need understanding, and we need some moves ahead which are going to encourage the transformation of Serbia in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A very provoking question. I will ask Mr. Moore yourself if you can answer that question, and then we will leave it at that. I'm sorry. Please.
Thank you very much for the question. I had the honor of meeting Prime Minister Vučić in Belgrade just a couple of days ago on my way here to Budva. We talked on a number of issues, including the development of bilateral relations, and we also affirmed, as we have been able to do to Serbia with a number of governments, as we talk about the open door to the alliance, the door is open to Serbia as well. Serbia currently has a policy of neutrality, is not applying to be a member of NATO. We're very pleased on a bilateral level. We have excellent relations between our militaries and a number of visits back and forth. The concept that the door is open to Serbia is something that needs to be understood. I think the results of the recent elections showing now an absence of Eurosceptics, at least public Eurosceptics in the Skupština, is a very important step forward. The commitment of the government and the previous government, both Prime Ministers Dačić and now Vučić, to the dialogue led by the European Union for normalization with Kosovo, which, by the way, thank you for mentioning the broader region, Kosovo as well, in our policy has our full support for joining both the Partnership for Peace and eventually NATO. If that is something that Serbia wishes to pursue, the United States would support that. The doors are open for Serbia as well. We have a comprehensive bilateral relationship. We're seeing a tremendous growth in investment in Serbia. That needs to be seen elsewhere in the region. The role that this government and Prime Minister Dačić, when he was in government, also played with regard to the region, Bosnia and Herzegovina, relations with Montenegro. We look forward to a good bilateral visit of the Prime Minister of Albania to Belgrade at some point soon. Serbia has shown its role in the region, its commitment to moving forward in a positive direction. We see that very clearly with the progress made towards the European Union. The door is open there as well. And I apologize to the moderator. I had no intention to turn this into a debate on NATO defense budgets. I'm glad that we've had the discussion about that. I hope it is clear that is not a new criterion that was imposed today on Montenegro, a country that has shown such tremendous progress and again is the most compelling candidate for NATO membership. With a question from Lithuanian, a brief anecdote. Having served in our embassy in Lithuania around the same time Stefan Füle was the ambassador of the Czech Republic in the 1990s, I remember very well in Washington and in other NATO capitals in 1995 and 1996. The idea that Lithuania or any of the Baltic states could ever join the alliance was completely outside, the local expression would be van pamet, would completely outside any possibility that such a thing would ever happen. NATO and enlargement and the open door is all part of a continuum. Getting through that door does not mean your work is done, you don't have to spend any money on defense, you will be protected, you're under the umbrella. And by the way, all of the ministers who are here, Minister Kodeli from Albania as well as the ministers here on the panel will tell you, if you ask them, did your country get into NATO soon enough? None of them, I suspect, would say, oh yes, absolutely, we got in too early. Everyone had to do the work to get into the alliance, and they have to continue to do the work inside the alliance, as we are committed to doing in the United States. It is an ongoing process. It's not about 2009 or 2014 or whenever a next summit would be. It's about ongoing investment and commitment to the alliance. We are confident that Montenegro is playing that role and will continue to do that, whether it gets in tomorrow or the next day or at whatever point in the future. It is an ongoing responsibility. We fully support that, and we are confident that those doors will stay open for other countries as well. I do not want to predict the future. I believe we're under Chatham House rules, but there are a few too many cameras, notebooks, and microphones for that. In any case, the day when Serbia applies for NATO, which is a day we hope to see in the future, and when other countries in the region move through that door, is what we want. The Europe whole, free, and at peace. The Republican and Democratic administrations, Secretary Kerry, Secretary Clinton, and their predecessors have been talking about for decades now. So thank you again for the opportunity to expound a little bit on the issues on the table.
Well, thank you very much. You've taken away most of my closing points, but never mind. I've been asked by the organizers to close this session because some people have to leave. I apologize to those. I know there's several people in the audience who have questions. I ask you to park them for the next session, if that is possible. In terms of closing remarks, I have to say a few. I think Minister Lukšić has to be the happiest person here today. I think you've heard some very encouraging words in terms of your possible future membership of the alliance. We've also heard that it's a wake-up call, despite early sort of indications from Russia going back decades. And we also anticipate new moves across NATO and the member states, possibly in terms of budgets. And that is it. I think I'll end it there. Thank you all very much for attending this first panel, and thank you for the panelists for answering the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.